In your top story then, Tanzanian freelance journalist Erick Kabendera, who has been detained since July last year, received news of the death of his mother while in Segerea prison in Dar es Salaam. He was apprehended by Tanzanian police, arrested and charged with what the state prosecutor says are non-bailable criminal offences. SABC's Kijo joins us live from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And just to note that there is a bit of a delay as we do chat to him. As a start, Daniel, non-bailable criminal offences. So that's rather curious, isn't it? What exactly are non-bailable criminal offences according to Tanzanian law?
Thank you so much for having us. Well, Erick Kabendera faces charges of money laundering, tax evasion and involvement in organized crime. According to the prosecution, during the dates between January 2015 and July 2019 in Dar es Salaam, him and other persons, the accused knowingly facilitated a criminal ring. The state further claims that the accused in his second offense failed to pay taxes amounting to $75,000 that were payable to the Tanzania Revenue Authority. In the third and final count, the journalist is accused of obtaining $75,000 while knowing that the said money was proceeds of offences, namely tax evasion and involvement in organized crime. So these are very serious charges.
Many people saying that this is in fact a witch hunt based on the fact that Erick Kabendera was in fact investigating certain people he shouldn't have been investigating, and so these charges were then sort of placed on him. Give us a sort of context about what is being said, though, in Tanzania around media circles, perhaps other reporters, in terms of the actual story and perhaps not the official story that's been given.
Like you said, there are many different versions of exactly why Mr. Kabendera is being held. Obviously, the government has insisted that he is being held because of the offences that I've mentioned: tax evasion, organized crime, etc., etc. But there have been stories, like you said, that have not been validated, that perhaps he was indeed investigating some powerful people, because Mr. Erick Kabendera has been a journalist. He's a seasoned journalist. He has worked for many international and regional news agencies. He at one time was a senior communication officer at the World Bank. He has written for The Economist and many other heavyweight news agencies. So perhaps there could be some truth, but as far as it stands, there has not been a validation of these stories.
How exactly is the issue of press freedom treated in the country?
Well, according to Tanzanian media law, there are certain responsibilities that journalists must adhere to. Obviously, I think this is similar to many countries in Africa where, issues of national security there's a sort of approach has to be a bit careful, like in many other countries. However, in recent years, in the last couple of years, there have been more reports from human rights activists that perhaps there has been some sort of control on press freedom in Tanzania. However, the government and President Magufuli has maintained that he is a friend of the press and that he, is not anti-democratic and trying to control press freedom. So there are two schools of thought when it comes to press freedom. However, news agencies, the Media Council of Tanzania, and many other organizations that protect the rights of journalists have a feeling that press freedom is a bit tight in Tanzania now.
Erick Kabendera just recently received news of his mother's passing. His mother had been very active in sort of campaigning for his release, and we understand that he's not being allowed to attend his mother's funeral. Tell us about the legality then behind the state's decision to deny him, to attend his mother's funeral. Surely he could be, accompanied by police, for instance.
Yeah, this issue has been received with mixed feelings by the general public. But according to Tanzanian legal experts, there is no legislation in Tanzanian law, in Tanzanian case law, that allows a detainee to gain access to the outside world. The only way for a detainee who has an ongoing case to be granted freedom, and in this case would be temporary freedom, there are certain scenarios. The first is if the offence is bailable, which means after being granted bail, the detainee would be free, and bail would only be granted if the judge feels that the detainee is not a risk. The second scenario is if the Director of Public Prosecution, the DPP, withdraws the case from proceeding. Another scenario is if the court dismisses the case, and finally if a already convicted person gets issued something called a presidential pardon. But in this case, Mr. Kabendera's case is still ongoing. And yes, talking about his mother, just a few weeks ago, his mother pleaded with the courts while she was still in a sickbed, pleaded with the court, asking the court to allow her son to have access to forgive her son. And now, a few weeks later, yes, indeed, she has lost her life. So when it comes to Tanzanian case law and legalities, there is no law that allows it unless those scenarios, and until, let's say, if Mr. Kabendera was convicted, then the president pardon could have also applied in this case. But of course, it is a situation where most the public feel that there should have been a bit of sympathy from the courts.
And speaking of that sympathy, is there no sort of push or pressure from any organization on the outside, perhaps his colleagues or fellow reporters or fellow journalists that are perhaps at this time trying to push the government to at least let him attend the funeral of his mother?
As far as we know, the funeral is expected to be this Sunday. He received news yesterday. He was in court yesterday morning, and in fact, he received the news and broke down. His lawyers were around him, comforting him. And of course, fellow journalists and the media fraternity and human rights activists were also in court following this case very closely. But as far as it stands, people have been tweeting, people have been talking, issuing their perception on the issue. And perhaps even on Sunday at the funeral, there might be a lot of the members of the media fraternity there supporting him. But as it stands, that pressure has not really yielded any results, and the court is still steadfast on its decision.
All right, thank you very much for that. Daniel Kijo joining us live from Dar es Salaam. We do appreciate that input you've given us on Tanzania. Of course, that's the story of the Tanzanian freelance journalist Erick Kabendera, who has been detained since last year, receiving news of the death of his mother, and of course the government refusing for him to attend the funeral. We'll of course give you any updates should you receive any from Tanzania, but as Daniel Kijo has told us, the government is steadfast and sticking to its guns about that decision.